Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today, we're exploring the idea of a government happiness minister who is responsible for the happiness of the population. So let's explore that. Donovan, what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, so for this hypothetical question, I feel like they could go one of two ways, right? Like having sort of a happiness minister or some like legal entity responsible for happiness, right? Some government entity could be a really good and useful thing if it was implemented correctly. And
True.
it could be like a horribly oppressive, terrible, awful thing if implemented incorrectly.
Right.
So that's kind of my gut feel is like, it really depends on what the person actually would end up doing. So for example, if like, oh, let's say that some random person off the street is appointed to that, and their idea of like, oh, I'm going to increase everyone's happiness. I'm super religious. That makes me happy. I'm going to make everyone happy and like enforce the same sort of, and then this doesn't have to be religion, but it can apply to anything that like, if an individual thinks it will make everyone happy and imposes it on everyone, that seems like a horrible idea.
Yeah.
But if the position was more around like, my job is to cultivate the environment, or I guess like the state or country or whatever this person is in charge of, cultivate like the environment so people are most likely to experience happiness, then I think that could be awesome. Anyway, I've been rambling. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, I think you made some really good points because it could definitely go sideways if done incorrectly, which, you know, happiness is relative to a lot of people. We just had that episode about happiness being relative, and like, what does that mean for some people? That could be like going to church and praying and all of that, but for others that would definitely cause the opposite effect of happiness, so like anxiety or resentment or distaste or something of that effect. So it is important, and it's like, I think of it would be really hard because, you know, the more people you add to a situation, the harder it is to please everyone or make them happy. It's like the bigger the numbers, it's why, you know, like the more views or things I get, you know, there's going to be more negative feedback that comes back. Like you can't make everyone happy, essentially. But I think, and I don't think you can force people into certain activities to try to get them to be happier. I think there has to be some free will, but maybe if there were more opportunities for them to engage in it and it was their choice, that would be potentially really beneficial. Like the first thing I thought of, how would he even, like this happiness minister, how would he or she begin this journey? And I actually thought of this article I read about, I think starting with children would be great, like helping them regulate their emotions. But I read this article of like a school coach or administrator actually like implementing like meditation in the morning for, I think, middle school kids or something of that effect. And it actually increased happiness, decrease detention and suspension rates, decrease violence, increase grades. So there were like a lot of benefits from that. But, you know, I think I don't know how easy, because then there could be like super religious folks being like, oh, you're trying to be spiritual or something like that, that could oppose it. So there's always going to be backlash with anything you do, I feel like, if it's done on a nation scale.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it'd be difficult to do something that would make everyone happy. And meditation is kind of a funny example because I feel like you could implement something with a different name just because that word comes with so much baggage, and then like it would be completely fine. But I think you're right. Like when I think about it, I think about like, okay, what would you be able to do, or like, how would you work on this? And knowing that you're not going to be able to please everyone. and we'll just keep it hypothetical and say like there's vaguely limitless power, right? Like you can just do whatever you want. So in my mind, the thing that would be most useful is figuring out what practices or things are most likely to increase people's happiness, and like you said, make them like very, very available. Not impose anything on anyone,
Right.
but things like you're saying, like meditation in general, it makes people happier.
Right.
Good like nutrition, good sleep, like physically being, safe and those things generally increase happiness. So just looking at those kinds of things that generally work and then imposing those, I think would be, or not imposing them, making them available would be sort of like the safest path to try to increase happiness over a population.
Yeah, definitely. I think though, because there's such a like wide distribution of wealth in our country in particular, it's like, what are your thoughts about like, should we address the population that's lower income first? Because it's like, or it's like, can we even get them to a happy state? Because it's like they're basically in survival mode and trying to just like get by. So like, yeah, getting their basic needs met by like offering more food options or a warm place to sleep might make them happy, or just might make them just like, okay, I could just relax for a moment. Maybe not happy per se, but just like not as stressed out, which could be beneficial. Um, or should we just do it like across the board for everyone? Or I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think it would depend on the way that you want to approach the problem. So we've talked about happiness before as being on like sort of a scale, right? As opposed to a binary.
Right.
So in my mind, if you were doing something like, okay, how do we utilize resources most efficiently to get the most possible happiness for people, right? Like maximize the area under the curve of happiness.
Right.
Then you're going to want to target the people that are the most unhappy, right? The people who have the least happiness, and that's very likely tied to like mental health problems, poverty, like these things that you typically associate with being unhappy.
Right.
Like that's probably where you're going to get the most bang for your buck.
Mm-hmm.
There is another, train of thought, which is like, that's not fair in one sense, right? In one sense, it would be like unfair because the majority of resources would go to sort of certain segments of the population instead of being distributed evenly. But then, there's another argument to say like, well, it's unfair, like in terms of you have no choice whether or not you're born with depression. Like you have no choice whether or not you're born competent enough to be able to do certain things. So there's kind of like it's all about the way that you want to approach it, but from strictly a like optimizing happiness point of view, right? If we're strictly looking for that, then it would make sense to sort of allocate the most resources to the people who are the most unhappy.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and I mean, unhappy people, touch every type of population, every type of background, essentially. But then I was thinking, oh man, if I was the happiness minister, like where would I start? And I'm thinking, okay, well, one, I'd want to like destigmatize like seeing a therapist or seeking out mental health support. That would be like one thing. And then like offering a lot of resources where people could access a therapist for free, or if they have limited resources. And I think potentially having them build the skills to learn how to be happy and not be so much a victim, and be able to be more have more power in the face of their situation could increase happiness. Those are my initial thoughts. What do you think you might do if you were the happiness minister?
So for me, I think the most powerful thing you can do, and you have to have some baseline. Like if you're really, really struggling and you can't focus or think straight or anything, then you need sort of your baseline needs covered. But outside of those situations, I think the most powerful thing that you can do is have more knowledge, right? Like because happiness is so influenced by the relationship we have with external things, right? So
Right.
You might not be able to get me a Bugatti, but you might be able to help me change my mindset to recognize that like that's not a powerful way to derive happiness for myself. So I
Mm,
think that would be the most useful thing.
yeah.
And the other piece of that is, having gone through a lot of the happiness literature myself and like looked at a bunch of the studies and whatnot, I would also work on developing something sort of like comprehensive but simple, right? Because one of the
Mhm.
big problems is like, let's say you're unhappy and you go to do a search to figure out how to get happier.
Right.
You are very likely to either get extremely dense research articles that are like impossible for the
Mhm.
average person to read through. And even if they could, it's so boring.
Right.
Or you're going to find people who just are giving hot takes, right? They're just unqualified. They've
Yeah.
done no research. They haven't like consulted the literature. They're just like, well, when I go out in nature, I get happier every time. So everyone should spend time in nature. And like that may be correct, but we should be founding everything on
Mm,
what we've researched, right? Like there's people here's a good example. I don't know if you've heard of like the like doing a dopamine cleanse or whatever
mm,
else to like, like, oh, I'm not going to eat anything I like and I'm not going to
mhm,
all that stuff. I don't know the backing of those claims,
mhm,
right? And that makes me wonder if it should be as prominent as it is. Now, it
mm,
might be. There might be really, really good scientific evidence behind it, but there might not be. And so, for like things like that, if we could
mhm.
get the research and then put it into an actual digestible format,
Right.
just like a much simpler, easier sort of like pathway and make that accessible to people, I think that would make huge leaps and bounds.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was just thinking, taking it a step further, like actually turning it into like curriculum that's just part of the school education that you have, and as like you take it like a math class or English class. It's just part of the curriculum. And there could be different levels. It's like there could be the elementary school version, and then you expand your skills in middle school, and then high school, then college, like happiness 101 to happiness 501 or something to that effect. And it's just like building the skills, like you were saying, like having more knowledge, giving them more tools would really be beneficial. Actually, it just reminds me of like, I think the education system right now is just so heavily focused on like the academia part of school, like math and science, English. But I think like from what I've heard, the general trend seems to be like less music classes or creative classes, or less home. I don't even know if they offer home ec anymore, which is something I did in middle school, which is like basic life skills. And this is essentially like developing basic life skills, because if you can develop, let's say, better relationships, better communication, maybe the divorce rate would decrease. Maybe you're just interacting with people in a more effective manner, so there's not so much conflict or strenuous things going on in your life, and that could make the world like a happier place overall.
Yeah, because I feel like when I went through my education,
Yeah.
it was all very, I don't even know what to call it, but just like math and science
Yeah.
focused, right?
Hmm.
Like, and I was very, very unhappy until I took it on my own
Hmm.
to
Right.
just like sort of go through a bunch of different resources and whatnot. And like I said, when you take that path on your own without it
Hmm.
being curated in any way or
Right.
like trimmed of things that are
Hmm.
more opinion than sort of generically useful,
Hmm.
you can end up consuming content that takes you down the wrong path.
True.
So if there was something, again, just like tailor made for schools in a way that's generic,
Hmm.
well backed, like
Yeah.
nice instead of having to sort of wander out on your own into the wilderness, then I think it would be a lot more effective for people. And I also don't think it would be a crazy ton of information that you need to learn. It wouldn't be like calculus where like a lot of people
Right.
really struggle to
Hmm.
understand and integrate the concepts. I feel like a lot of the concepts are um, more intuitive if they're presented in the right light.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. The other thing I was thinking of, it's like, man, what would I do as the happiness minister of the country is also observe other countries, because I'm pretty sure that there's way happier countries than the US. Like what comes to mind is Sweden. I think they generally seem like happier people, and I think that's based on variable levels of like income, or maybe it's like vacation time. I hear like Europe, well, I don't know. I don't know how that compares, but like because Europe generally has like more vacation time compared to US, because we're so like work oriented. They're generally happier with that, having fewer work hours during the week, having a longer lunchtime. Maybe that would be beneficial. I'm trying to think of other things that other countries do better than us, which is a lot. Can't even begin. Just sort of better food, less like processed foods. I think they're more definitely Europe does a better job about like regulating of like foods that are highly addictive and processed.
Yeah, it's for sure not something like happiness is for sure not something that's prioritized
Yeah.
here for
Yeah.
us.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's another thing that I would add on. If you sort of had the power to do whatever you wanted, it would be nice if there were much stronger or more cohesive community institutions. Like a lot of the places I've lived, it doesn't seem like there are good ways to get integrated into the community in a generic way. And by that I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, if you're into politics, you can get into whatever the politic group is, or if you're into sports, or if you're into like if
Mm-hmm.
you have a specific interest,
Yeah.
then you can usually find some sort of group in whatever place. But most of the places I've been, I don't know where there would be like sort of something more generic, right? Like to help you integrate into the community or just like feel a part of it. You have to just sort of develop it on your own
Mm-hmm.
over time. And I don't know what that would look like, but
Mm-hmm.
I imagine there is some sort of institution you could create
Yeah.
that like really fosters a sense of community, just because that's one of the biggest drivers of happiness is feeling like connected to others.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be really important too. But that kind of goes back to the other thing of just developing the social skills to build those connections. Um, and I'm like, what would that look like? It goes back to my other point of like destigmatizing, um, not necessarily therapy, but just like being able to be open and vulnerable, destigmatizing that so people can feel more connected and share and not keep conversations more on a superficial level, that they can actually learn skills to connect on a deeper level with others, I think would be really beneficial. Therefore, they don't feel so alone. And that I think that is a common factor for people who are struggling with like suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, I'm going back to what you said a little while ago and combining a couple of like the ideas that are coming together, but I think it'd be really cool if there was some sort of institution that like you mentioned therapy being free, but it could be free to go to and have something like not just therapy, but also like more what will I call it? Just like more generic like coaching or group sessions or like
Yeah. Community
you know
building or something. Yeah.
yeah, and like there could be sort and I guess some places do have community centers like this, but not in a way that I feel like is well
Mm-hmm.
integrated. Usually they're like pretty quiet and kind of hard to find, and
Right.
um I actually don't know what goes on there because I've never been to something like that. But I feel like if you had free access to something that you knew was sort of like people with training, right? Whether it's like a therapist or coaches or
Right.
like group sessions or something else to help people like figure out their goals and values and all the things that typically drive happiness,
Mhm.
I think that would be extremely useful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Do you have any other thoughts of what a happiness minister should be responsible for or do?
Yeah, I mean, I just it would be a really cool idea, and just to see where things went. But one thing we didn't mention that would also be very, very present is like everything has a cost, So it's
Right,
like
that's true. What can we afford?
whether or not it's better or worse, like
Yeah.
if if all of a sudden we had all these like policies around, okay, people are working less, lunches have to be this long, like those kinds of things, you'd have the other group that would like argue like, oh, GDP is going to go down and productivity is going to go down, and I don't know whether or not that's true. I don't know if that's better or worse. I just want to like throw out that we have been sort of taking this hypothetical, and there would, of course, for any of these things to actually implement them, be some other counterbalance, like some other thing to think about, whether or not one's like the right choice or the wrong choice or better or worse or whatever is irrelevant.
True. Yeah. And there's always going to be people that are like, why are we even spending money on a happiness minister? It's like, we could be using that towards something else. It's like, yeah. So that's the nature of government. I can't make everyone happy. Anyways, I think that's it for this episode. If you appreciate us, because we appreciate you, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.